Tourism, classified by a definition provided through the Tourism Society, is a generic term to cover both supply and demand in various forms. It's classified as the activities of people identified as visitors. A visitor is someone who is making a visit to a primary destination outside their usual environment for less than a year for any main purpose, including holidays, leisure, business, and education. This video will focus on a particular sector of tourism called ecotourism. According to TIES, the International Ecotourism Society, the latest definition of ecotourism is responsible travel to natural areas that conserves the environment, sustains the well-being of the local people, and involves interpretation and education. Ecotourism is centered around uniting conservation, communities, and sustainable travel. In order to implement this, some of the principles that must be adopted include minimizing physical, social, behavioral, and psychological impacts, building environmental and cultural awareness and respect, providing positive experiences for both visitors and hosts, and recognizing the rights and spiritual beliefs of the indigenous people of the community and working in partnership with them to create empowerment. So if you've ever heard this saying about how squares can be rectangles, but rectangles can't be squares, the same can be said that any form of tourism can be made more sustainable, but not all forms of tourism can be ecotourism. Ecotourism isn't a perfected practice, and in order for it to improve, areas of weakness should be exposed. Two immediate and glaring weaknesses are within the practices of wildlife tourism and indigenous tourism. While neither of these forms of tourism are inherently negative, the specific practices of them can be. The Journal of Sustainable Tourism is a great source for learning about methods for creating a sustainable system of tourism, what is being done right, and what is being done wrong. In an article titled Unethical Use of Wildlife in Tourism, the author identifies wildlife tourism as a huge global market, one that often has entire economies dependent on it. If done correctly, wildlife tourist attractions, or WTAs, can promote local livelihoods, encourage tourist education, enact conservation, and improve animal welfare. However, these outputs can only occur when ethics are prioritized over financial profit, and when a country's economy is dominated by the tourism industry, emphasis is typically placed on financial profit. Since there is an absence of global authority and regulations on WTAs, tourist revenue and demand is what acts as a determiner of how wildlife is used. The campaign Wildlife, Not Entertainers, through World Animal Protection, focuses on dismantling unsustainable and unethical wildlife tourism practices. One common example of unethical wildlife use is elephant riding. In nearly all wildlife entertainment, animals are separated from their mothers and broken through a system of abuse in order to cultivate human dominance. An argument that is often made is centered around the educative value of wildlife tourism. It's undeniable that animals can provide a learning experience, but that experience shouldn't have to involve human entertainment at the cost of an animal's well-being. One example of healthy wildlife tourism takes place in Sabah, Malaysia. There's a non-profit sun bear conservation center in which visitors can come and observe sun bears from a distance while they're being rehabilitated. Sun bears are a popular target for poachers who look to sell them on the black market as pets or for their body parts. The center rescues bears, rehabilitates them, and resocializes them to their natural habitat. This method is an alternative to forcing direct interaction and confining them to an unreasonably restricted space. To further educative potential, there is also a volunteer program in which people can learn how to help and contribute to sun bear rehabilitation. In regards to indigenous tourism, it is often seen as a way to revitalize native communities. The two goals of this type of tourism are to protect the values of ethnic culture and to generate economic gains. However, it's not always easy for those two goals to coexist. An article titled Serious Tourists, A Proposition for Sustainable Tourism, asserts that productive and healthy indigenous tourism can only be achieved through serious tourists as opposed to leisure tourists. Not all those who visit indigenous attractions or indigenous businesses have a strong interest in the culture. One example of indigenous tourism gone wrong is a commodification of traditions, practices, and clothing for mainstream use because indigenous culture and ethnicity is viewed as a trend. One example of this is found in Taiwan. Indigenous tribes in Taiwan have gained little from tourism and have instead suffered from distorted cultural presentations with great losses in environmental quality and lifestyles. The Rukai Harvest Festival has turned into a tourist-catered event, and much of the original meaning has become superficial. The most beneficial type of visitor to indigenous communities, according to this article, is one that is adventurous, wants authenticity, seeks education, and desires personal interaction. Visitors are the key players in tourism development, and thus every action they take has an effect larger than what is recognized. The most positive ecotourism experience I've had was visiting Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic. Prior to my visit, I thought negatively of resort spaces because I consider them to be an inauthentic and unrealistic representation of a country. Punta Cana isn't the best cultural representation of the Dominican Republic, but they are undeniably world leaders in sustainable tourism. The following video excerpt is from a promotional video by the Punta Cana Ecological Foundation.
Sometimes you have to be the first to take the leap. The first to jump in leads the way. It often entails diving into uncharted paths, looking for living, breathing solutions to real-world challenges, wherever these may be. It can demand standing firmly on solid ground, often standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. Or it can entail helping them soar to new heights, stronger than ever. It means recognizing our obligation to the planet, walking on and moving forward, yet always softening our footprints. Recognizing that what for some might be seen as waste can be transformed into energy for others. Being practical, after all, is sustainable. From the ground up, we keep discovering that in sustainability, there is room for creativity and innovation. And it is our duty to pass on this knowledge to coming generations so that they too become pioneers and caretakers of that which sustains us. Leading the way requires a new vision for development. Rather than focusing on what we shouldn't be, we work to inspire a hopeful vision of what we can and should aspire to be.
What was demonstrated in the video includes sustainable methods of combating invasive species like lionfish, reestablishing endangered and threatened species such as the Ridgway hawk, Punta Cana's zero-waste biomass system, composting systems, and sustainable beekeeping. At the Ecological Foundation, they also practice sustainable agriculture and aquaculture to cultivate food sources of vegetables and fruits that they then distribute to different hotels and resorts in the area. It was inspiring to be in a place where so much emphasis was placed on the stewardship and protection of the environment. It was clear that the organization fully utilizes systems thinking in that they recognize that we as humans are still bound by natural laws and systems, and that if we have the capacity to destroy the environment, we should have the potential to help rebuild it as well. So when done correctly, tourism can enact cultural preservation, enhance community growth, raise awareness for human and animal rights, and spread environmentalism. However, to ensure this, tourists must take accountability for their actions. Change can be made on a policy level, but it's tourists who shape that policy. So the next time you travel somewhere, act conscientiously. Think about the way your actions, your money, and even your presence affects the place that you are visiting.